Welcome to the Payments Podcast. I'm your host, Bottomline Managing Editor, Owen McDonald. We're focusing on data security and risk in this episode. Specifically, we're looking at the use of tokenization in business payments. But if you think I mean the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS for short, you'd be mistaken. There's another form of tokenization tailor-made for B2B payments. We're going to talk about that. Joining us for this adventure in payment security is Mark Bish, Principal Product Manager at Bottomline. Mark Bish, welcome to the Payments Podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me along.
Let me jump right in by asking you, Mark, to explain the difference between tokenization for consumer payment cards, like I mentioned in my opening, and this, dare I say, better approach to business payments tokenization.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, as the focus of the two services is very different. When you mention tokenization, you immediately think about credit and debit cards. And that's because the risk of exposure of details in those services is so significant. And so those services are really highly visible. They simplify compliance with regulations like PCI DSS that have been put in place to protect cardholder information and protect people from fraud. The focus we've taken is on providing a sort of a very similar kind of protection for bank account data, but enabling organizations to not only replace the bank account data they hold with a unique, randomly generated token, but also verify the account holder at the same time as well. And that's been driven by a continued need to firstly minimize the risk of payments to a fraudulent account by ensuring that the account holder is who you believe it to be. And secondly, the growing emphasis on avoiding the storage of sensitive bank account details due to the risk of data breaches, whether that's hacking, insider fraud, or just simple human error.
Now, we spoke recently about the problem businesses have managing the risk attack surface, and that's a term describing having bank account details held in multiple places, from spreadsheets to ERPs, each with different levels of security. Mark, explain the major points in that risk equation and how tokenization shrinks the risk footprint.
I think the challenges, as you've alluded to in the question, frequently people hold account details in multiple places within their business, and the tools that they use to hold the data vary greatly dependent on the purpose. And each of those tools has different security levels. Some examples could be customer account data held in an ERP, an enterprise resource planning system, a customer relationship management system, or payroll might hold account details in a spreadsheet, or they might do the same for one-off or supplier payments. And then when you create a payment file, again, that process is going to vary. ERPs or CRMs may generate a payment file directly and place it in a folder ready for processing. But payment files are often submitted without first verifying the account holder. As I mentioned earlier on, it's really key to make sure that the person that you're paying is who you believe them to be. And there can be challenges around auditing the filed contents and traceability to the source. How do you know what's in that file when you make a payment? Is what you put in there when you created the file. If you look at things like payroll supplier, where they've maybe got payments held within a spreadsheet, they may create the file, pass it on to another team for processing. Those files are often sent unencrypted by email or passed across through a folder. Again, there's no audit trail, there's no version control of those files. And those unencrypted files could be viewed, edited, rekeyed into separate portals, and there's little or no traceability back to the original source. And that's a real challenge. So if you look at all of the numerous places where the data is held, that means there's numerous places where problems can occur. So internal fraud with limited traceability, altered bank account details without any verification. Manually rekeying can do something as simple as just introduce a mistake. Unintentional data leaks, somebody sending an email could send it to the wrong person. They could even send it outside the business. And because the files are all over the business, there's multiple places where hackers can get in and access that information. If you think about it, from our perspective as a payment processor, we have to have account details because we're processing the payment. But as a payment requester, then that's not really the case. You just need to be able to tell us who you want paying, how much and when, and then we can deal with the rest of it. And that's really the solution that we have. What we've enabled customers to do is to manage their risk by removing bank account details from their business systems and replacing them with anonymous tokens. The service can work through an API, so you can embed it into front-end forms where you're capturing people's information, or where you've got low-volume environments such as payroll, you could process that information via a UI. When you want to make a payment, you use the token instead of the bank account details. There's no rekeying, no unexpected errors. There's no manual fixes required to the system. It's a simple file of, here's the token, here's the value, here's the date, and we can process that information. What the tokenization service will do, it will take that file, enrich it with the verified account data, convert it to the correct format for the payment system, and push it downstream through the payment processor. So it's a really straightforward service.
And it shrinks the risk footprint down to virtually zero, doesn't it?
Replacing the bank account data with tokens does really reduce the risk surface area, because you're not holding bank account details in multiple places around the business. If you don't hold the bank account data, therefore that bank account data is not exposed to leakage, to hacking, to misdirected files. Plus, from an internal fraud perspective, it's not exposed internally to your own users either. So it's a much better way to do things. And you're not exposing that kind of data across your business systems.
You're based in the UK, where we saw recent high-profile cyber attacks on household names that I won't mention, but we all know who they are. To what extent can such attacks and those targeting B2B payments be stopped using tokenization like we're talking about?
So the short answer is that no, you can't really do a lot to deflect hostile attacks, as fraudsters are continuously looking for weaknesses within business systems. They want to gain access to whatever data they can. What tokenization does, though, is it reduces, as we've mentioned before, the risk surface area. So not holding that bank account data that you rely on to make payments. So by putting the bank account data out of reach of the fraudsters, the breadth of the data they can gain access to is reduced, and that helps to lessen the impact of a data breach on customers, suppliers, employees. So no, you can't stop the attacks, but you can lessen the impact of them for certain.
Seems to me this form of tokenization could be especially effective against insider fraud. You alluded to that earlier. It's a huge and growing problem. How does tokenization help prevent insider fraud specifically, Mark?
I think a good place there is to think about what we mean by an insider fraud and why it can happen. So think of all of the attack vectors. So if I can change account details against a record in an ERP or a CRM, is it audited, and would they know that I did it? If I can access a folder where payment files are processed, ready for processing, if I edit the file and change the bank account details, will I be identified as the culprit? The same for account numbers in, say, a payroll or a supplier file. Will I be identified if I type a different account number in that's been given to me into a payment system? And perhaps I can change the file it was sent. So will you be able to identify that I was the culprit and I performed that? If I've got a spreadsheet, can I copy it? Will you know that I've copied it? Can I take a photograph of it with my phone so I have it on my phone? Could I even email it to myself outside? And would you even identify that I've sent those account details out? So if you change nothing else in that whole process with those systems, the way that they work right now, if you replace the account number with an anonymous token, only relevant to me in my business, none of those actions would provide the insider with the ability to commit fraud, because they can't steal the account details because they're not there. They can't overkey them because they're not there. They're anonymous tokens. I mean, how simple is that? And I'm not saying that organizations shouldn't do more to tighten things up too, if they can make their services more secure. But that simple, straightforward change just removes a whole chunk of data and makes it useless to the fraudster.
Agreed. And we talk a lot here at Bottomline, various subject matter experts, about a layered approach to security, but clearly this has its place. Last question, Mark. What parting advice would you give to AP teams and others as it relates to improving the security of payment accounts, and particularly the processes used to make payments more secure?
I think the first thing they need to do is to look across the business and identify where they hold account details. Who has access to the data? Where do they store payment files? Who has access to payment files? How are files shared around the business? Are they done securely? Are they encrypted, etc.? What processes are in place to ensure data lineage? And that's sort of the knowledge that the information that you've captured at the point where you've onboarded a customer or a supplier is the same as the account that you're paying. That's really important to understand. I'm sure that lots of organisations have got that totally nailed down, but I'm sure there's lots and lots that would be able to do a lot more to prevent their exposure. And if they did that investigation, they might find they're more exposed than they perhaps thought they were. And then if they think about what it would mean to them just by simply removing bank account details and how it would improve that exposure for them, I think that's the key place where they need to start off.
There it is. Chances are that you started listening to this episode with one understanding of tokenization, and you are leaving with a different understanding. We hope so. Thanks to our excellent guest, Mark Bish, Principal Product Manager at Bottomline. To our audience, the smartest people in payments, thanks for listening. Hit subscribe. Catch us again on your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. Bye for now.